Wednesday, Dog Nation. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. Busy show for us. In a couple of minutes, we're actually going to find out live, I'm assuming an announcement from UGA on something, speculation that it might be related to the in-stadium policy involving fans. At least that's the thinking man's opinion at the moment, or thinking person's, if you will. So we'll hear about that coming up in a couple of minutes. We'll talk to Mike Griffith about that. I'm also going to begin today by talking a little bit about the challenge of facing a 10-game SEC schedule, something, by the way, that Georgia has done in the past, and the results from then give us, I think, an indication of just how tough this is going to be for this year there as well. We'll talk about something interesting that N'Kobe Dean had to say yesterday, and some projections coming out for how Georgia could fare this season, including some individual point spreads, too, which is always kind of a fun thing to dive into. We have got a lot of ground to cover. Some of it happening live even as I speak, all of it involving you. Glad to have you as a part of your participation, viewership, comments, everything else. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Harrah's Cherokee Resort. Find us online at caesars.com/Harrah's-Cherokee.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
One of the things that I love about the fact that we get to do this show each and every day is the fact that sometimes you have room to kind of really examine a topic that maybe if you were only doing this a couple times a week, something like that, you just wouldn't be able to do. And there's something that's been on my mind for a little while, and I wanted to try to kind of find the numbers to articulate this and kind of really examine just how different a SEC-only schedule is going to be for Georgia and the other teams that play that, and how really the expectations for every team in the league becomes once you don't have non-conference games that you're expected to win, once you don't have a lot of, padded victories on the schedule, when it's only the SEC, when that's all you're playing. All of a sudden, everything just gets more challenging, more difficult because of that. And I wanted to look at some numbers to kind of back that up. And really, when you go back and look at the recent history of Georgia, it gives you an idea for why this upcoming season, for every team, but the one we care about the most here, the Dogs, is just going to be really difficult. Let me show you this on the screen, and it'll kind of take us where we need to go here. This is what Georgia has done in the last 4 years, all 4 of Kirby Smart's years as Georgia coach. I want to highlight a couple of things for you. The record that you see, if you're watching on video on the left side of your screen, that's the total number of SEC games Georgia played. Now, the official record in most of those years was different than the total number of opponents because Georgia would go to the SEC championship game or play Alabama in the national championship game. And on the right side of the screen, you see the winning streak that Georgia had against SEC foes that particular year. Let me give an explanation of this, and I'll tell you why this matters. This is consecutive weeks against SEC teams. So I didn't count it if it was a win that came against a non-conference team, or if there was a bye week, then Georgia won again, because this year Georgia's going to be asked to play long stretches of games against only SEC teams, something that has not done a ton in the past. So for radio podcast, let me read this to you. So last year against 9 SEC foes, Georgia went 7-2. The winning streak, 4 consecutive weeks, Georgia found a way to beat SEC competition. That happened in the month of November, and if you'll remember, we spent a lot of time talking about how daunting that stretch was. But Georgia did go on a 4-game winning streak in November. That was actually the high water mark in terms of weeks worth of consecutive SEC wins for Kirby Smart. In 2018, Georgia also went 7-2 against SEC foes. The winning streak, 3 consecutive weeks, Georgia beat SEC teams going back to 2018. In 2017, Georgia went 8-2 against teams from the SEC, and once again found a way to win against SEC opponents 4 consecutive weeks. 2016, Kirby Smart's first year, not quite as good of a year overall. Georgia just 4-4 against SEC competition that year. The winning streak Georgia put together was 2. Now, there's a couple of reasons why I show all this to you. First of all, the winning streak part of this really matters because, as you see, even though Georgia's been very successful under Kirby Smart in recent years, there hasn't been a time yet where Georgia has won 5 consecutive weeks against SEC teams, either because it hasn't played SEC teams 5 consecutive weeks, or it had a bye week, it had a non-conference game, or it lost a game, whatever else. But this year, to start the season, Georgia will have to play 5 weeks in a row against SEC teams before it gets a bye week, which gives you an idea of just how challenging the schedule is going to be. You also see there in every year under Kirby Smart, even though Georgia's enjoyed great success under Smart, in every year under Smart, Georgia has lost at least 2 games to SEC foes in the course of that season. And let me highlight this with the 2017 campaign for Georgia, because what Georgia has already done, what already experienced, is what every SEC team is at least going to attempt to experience this year when it comes to the 10-game conference schedule. Back in 2017, Georgia played 10 SEC opponents, and I believe it joins only LSU in 2011 as the only teams to ever play 10 SEC opponents in a given season. Y'all check my math on that, but I believe that I'm right about that. And think about that Georgia team for a moment, the one that won the SEC and played for the national championship. You had Nick Chubb and Sonny Michel at running back, one of the great tandems to ever work together in all of college football. You had Roquan Smith, the Butkus Award winner on that team. You had a number of guys who are in the NFL right now. Jake Fromm, as a freshman quarterback, was having a very good season for freshman quarterbacks. You had a lot going for you, and against 10 SEC opponents, Georgia goes just 8-2, which was a great performance, but it's, once again, I think indicative of the fact that when you're facing 10 SEC opponents in a given season, it just makes for a real challenge. Now, in 2011, LSU did find a way to go 9-1 against those SEC foes, but that's probably more the outlier in all of this. And by the way, the recent track record when it comes to Georgia on this front is pretty similar to the rest of the SEC overall. Last season, LSU was the only team in the SEC to have fewer than 2 losses against other SEC opponents. And here's also something worth noting, that Arkansas, Vanderbilt were the only teams not to have at least 2 wins. Ole Miss had 2. Everybody else in the SEC had 3 or more. So there's more balance in the league in terms of the win-losses than you might realize. Go back to 2018 for a moment. Alabama was the only team in the SEC not to lose at least twice to SEC competition. Georgia, by the way, was the only team in the SEC in 2018 that didn't lose 2 or more games. To everybody else lost 3 or more. Go back to 2017 for a moment. Alabama was the only team in the SEC not to lose twice to other SEC foes. And once again, all but 3 teams in the league won at least 3 games. So what you see and what you set up for is a scenario, I believe, where the kinds of records that we're just used to seeing college football teams have, 12-0, 11-1, this is one of those years where it's just not going to quite work out that way, where what we think of as a good season, 8-2 may be a great season. 2017 Georgia against 10 SEC foes went 8-2. I think most of us would say that was a great team. But great teams have a way of just kind of feeling a little different when you're talking about 10 games against the best competition that college football has to offer from the SEC. Now, by the way, Kirby Smart, if I had to guess, is probably on the same page in all of this, because if you go back to last spring, this is a different topic, but it's a similar sentiment. When Smart was talking about adding all those really tough non-conference foes that Georgia's going to face in future years, Texas, Ohio State, Oklahoma, teams like that, part of his reasoning for doing that is because he sees a change coming to college football. What he said then is interesting now on this topic. This is Kirby briefly from last spring.
I'm thinking that to get in the playoffs as the future goes, I don't know whether they'll ever expand it. That's not for me to even kind of divulge on. But I do think that you're going to need a quality of schedule to do that. I think that there's going to be 2 lost teams in the future. If they've got a really tough schedule, that'll be able to make that.
So Kirby Smart says the future of the college football playoff, you may have 2 lost teams to make the playoff. Now, Kirby couldn't have known then what we know now, that Georgia's about to play 10 SEC teams for this upcoming season. But if what he said was true then I think it's doubly true as we head towards 2020. There's a chance the best team in the country, likely from the SEC, could be 8-2 in the regular season. I'm not telling you that Georgia's going to lose more than once this season. There's a chance that UGA does, and it's obviously among the most talented teams in the country that are still planning on playing for this upcoming season. But what I am telling you is there are a lot of SEC teams who are likely to lose more games this season than they otherwise thought they would. Let me give you a quick example of this. Saturday Down South, using some data from the gambling website Bovada, showing us the now altered season win totals for SEC teams, the updated over-unders. Now that we know that teams are only going to play 10 games, they're all going to be against SEC foes, all of a sudden the predicted records for a lot of these teams way different than we initially thought. Can I show you some of these numbers from Bovada here? Recalibrated expectations all the way around. Alabama's now at 9. So the gambling folks expecting a 9-1 record from Bama in the regular season. Georgia down to 8.5. But it gets even more interesting after that. LSU now down to 8, expecting an 8-2 as the most likely outcome, at least according to Bovada. Get this for Florida. Their updated season win total projection, 7.5, and there's juice on the under. What that means is the gambling public right now would seem to think that a 7-3 outcome for Florida more likely than an 8-2. Even worse for Auburn, they are at 7. Texas A&M is at 6. Kentucky's projected season win total is at 4.5. And how about this for the Tennessee Vol? After all of the talk of big resurrection of that program under Jeremy Pruitt, now facing a 10-game SEC schedule, and for Tennessee it is a tough one. According to Bovada, as quoted by Saturday on South, the new projected season win total for Tennessee is just 4. In other words, Tennessee, according to the gambling folks, is going to have to scratch and claw just to get its way to a 500 record. And a winning record of any kind for Tennessee might actually be quite an accomplishment, at least according to what Bovada has said and what Saturday Down South has published there. So the bottom line on all of this is, for Georgia, for everybody else in the SEC, when you really look at the numbers, when you look at just how few teams over the years have, found a way to win all but one of their SEC games, most teams losing more than once to SEC foes last few years. Typically in a given season, there's only one team that finds a way to get that done. Maybe the best Georgia team of the last 40 years against 10 SEC foes going back to 2017 still just went 8-2 against those teams, SEC competition way back in 2017. It's a tough row to hoe. When you're only playing SEC teams, there are probably going to be a lot more losses coming for a lot more teams in this conference than they otherwise would have expected. And if you're Georgia, you've just got to try to find a way to navigate those waters. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort as we do the show live today. Breaking news a moment ago, Georgia making it known its stadium policy for the upcoming year, limited number of fans. We'll find out how limited here in just a moment. I'll share that with you live, of course, for our radio and podcast audience. Many of you already aware of that. We'll have Mike Griffith coming up in just a moment. We'll get in-the-moment reaction to him from that news. And a huge thanks to our friends at Harris Cherokee Casino Resort for making this all possible. They're back open again, doing some great things for you right now. That means social distancing there in the hotel, more space in the gaming floor. When you're enjoying the restaurants and the shopping, everything like that, you're going to have more room to roam around. Just keeping your distance away from other people. Harris Cherokee Casino Resort making that easy to do. As far as the distance, though, from your home to Harris Cherokee Casino Resort, that's just as close as it ever was, though. It's less than around a 2-hour drive or so from Atlanta. Very easy to get to. Really a great getaway here in the late summer as we're waiting for the upcoming season to start. They've also got a fun thing going on right now with Friday Night Frenzy. It's drawings held every half hour from 5 to 8 p.m. with $20,000 in cash prizes to be shared. Those entries, Friday Night Frenzy, can be earned all month long. So please go to this website. It's Caesars.com/Harris-Cherokee. That's Caesars.com/Harris-Cherokee, and that'll get you in touch with them and get you on your way to a great getaway with Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. 2-hour drive from Atlanta. Really fun to be a part of, and it's great to have them back here on DawgNation Daily here as well. All right, let me do this. This is just coming out for right now. All right, let me show you this on the screen for those of you watching on video. Georgia making this announcement a moment ago. Georgia going with a capacity for Sanford Stadium for this upcoming fall of 20 to 25%, which if you do the math on the 93,000-seat stadium, means somewhere between 18 and 23,000 fans to be admitted for Georgia's 4 home games for this upcoming season. Also, some important details on this as well. They're going to try to provide as many season ticket holders as possible the opportunity to attend at least one home game, and that's very important. Donors will have who have to opt out for this year will not be penalized and will keep their seat location for 2021. That's also going to be viewed as good news by many people. Away game tickets will not be available except for the Georgia-Florida game in Jacksonville. So there will be a stadium split, probably also a limited number for Georgia-Florida in Jacksonville. But it sounds like the SEC will not be honoring away tickets for the various teams this year. In a normal year, a trip to Alabama would have been a very hot ticket for many donors, but that not available here this year. So that is big news. Season ticket holders are going to, looks like they may get a chance to be at least a part of one of these games this year. You might imagine that the bigger donors get a chance to be a part of maybe some more there. Folks will be able to opt out of those tickets without being penalized and losing their seat location in 2021. That is good news. And no away tickets for Georgia to disperse this season. Also, the other SEC teams would stand to reason will not be dispersing back towards Georgia on that. So it is going to be a very, very different kind of year this year. I think one of the things that will be interesting to find out more about, and obviously this Georgia announcement is not going to determine that, but with some of the sporting events where we have seen fans already, there was a mileage restriction on, like, say, NASCAR. When Talladega had some fans a couple of months ago, there was a mileage restriction in place that you could only be within, like, say, several hundred miles away from the venue to actually get those tickets. I wonder if the SEC folks will be kind of doing the same thing here. I wonder if there's going to be any kind of process for selling your tickets on the secondary market or giving your tickets away to somebody else that wants to use them. Obviously with a limited number of tickets, only a certain number of people are going to have access to those. How much does this change your ability to sell it, to transfer it to somebody else? That's going to be something I think the average fan is going to be really curious about. And for people who have given money, donations, ticket prices, things like that, for games they now will not be allowed to attend, I do think there's going to be a lot of chatter still to come about what the process is of them getting that money back, what Georgia may do to incentivize folks not asking for that money back, rolling it over to the following year. For some people, a chance to move up the donation points pecking order might be a good thing. For other people, they'd rather have the cash in hand for the games they won't be allowed to be a part of in 2020. So Georgia making an announcement here, but that's only going to do so much to answer all the questions that many Georgia fans have about this. So we will continue to follow all of that, including right now. For more on this news just coming out and for everything else that's going on with UGA practices, let's get ready to talk to Mike Griffith here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
I'll bring in Mike Griffith on this. He's been covering everything going on from Athens, from his home there in Athens over the course of the last few days as Georgia has gotten to work here with the start of preseason camp. Mike, this is not unexpected news. Georgia's overall fan numbers falling pretty closely in line with what Alabama announced yesterday, what Tennessee announced. If memory serves, I believe that Texas A&M may be shooting for a little higher capacity than this in terms of the percentage of their stadium there at Kyle Field. But Georgia going to give it a go with somewhere between 18 and 23,000 fans, about 20 to 25% capacity. These are round about the numbers that we've at least considered a strong possibility for a number of months. What's your reaction to the announcement that was made today?
Yeah, B.A., I think you're right. That was pretty much what we wrote last month. Nick McGarity said they had a good stadium plan. I mean, it is in line with the other schools. It was a good-sized stadium, 92,000. I want to say it's somewhere in the top 10, maybe 7 or 8. It's never going to be enough for some fans, and it's going to come down to donors. I know that's going to rub people the wrong way, but these are the people that are putting their names on buildings and making $81 million football buildings possible. So, of course, you got to serve those people that are going to donate and help build the program.
I wonder, as I said before you joined us, there are a lot of questions that this announcement alone, at least the details that I've shared, won't necessarily answer. I wonder about the percentage of students that will be allowed in the stadium here this fall. And I guess maybe more interesting than that for a lot of my audience, because there are a lot of my audience that want to be at games, but they won't be one of the ones tabbed to be a part of the tickets for those games, including, by the way, potentially some away games there as well, which there will be none of in terms of official Georgia tickets for away games this year. I wonder what the process will be for acquiring tickets in the secondary market. Will there be a mileage restriction in terms of who can get their hands on those tickets? Will there be some sort of process in place that restricts your ability to either give tickets away, transfer them, sell them? I think for a lot of people, that's going to be a source of curiosity. They're not season ticket holders anyway. They buy all their tickets in the secondary market. Will that still be allowed this season? For a lot of the people who listen or watch a show like this, that's going to be one of the big questions that comes up of what's the process of getting your hands on tickets if you're not lucky enough to be one of the ones that were initially pegged to have them?
Yeah, I would imagine that there'll still be a secondary market. I don't know how you could take that away. The thing is that, the tickets are going to be delivered via mobile. And so that transfer will be tricky, but you can bet with the technology we have, if there's money to be made, somebody's going to figure that out. I don't think there's going to be any empty seats because somebody decided not to go to a football game.
Well, I don't mean so much empty seats in the stadium. I mean people that, that just look to buy these things in the secondary market. You can't really transfer airline tickets, in other words. So there are some, restrictions on ticket transfers and other entities. There have been concerts in the past where there was a technology in place that restricted you reselling them to someone else. I wonder how much of that these college football teams care to use. I mentioned before you joined us, when NASCAR allowed some fans in some of its venues this year, there was a mileage restriction on who could attend that. You could only be, I'm making up the number here, but something like 200 miles away from the track or something like that to be able to attend. That there have been, in the limited sporting events that we've seen recently where tickets have been available, there have been some restrictions on those tickets in some instances.
Yeah, that's some fascinating information. I've been fortunate to have a credential for 28 years. I just don't go to events on my own dime. I don't have time. Not my area of expertise, Brandon. You know a lot more about that than I. That's fascinating, and it's definitely something that we're going to keep an eye on, because you're right. Fans are going to want to go, and probably some of these people are going to want to sell those. I imagine there's going to be a lot of money to be made. I know the release of the tickets are going for $150. I mean, you and I both know. Now Georgia only has 4 home games, and 2 of them are Mississippi State and Vanderbilt in November, and who cares, right? But those Tennessee and Auburn tickets, I would imagine, would be at a premium.
The other thing is, and then I want to move on and talk about something different, which is, for a lot of folks this year who are not going to get to have the experience in the stadium they hope they would be able to have, you wonder at what kind of incentive they are going to maybe be offered for the chance to roll some of that money over. How many people are going to ask for that money back? If a lot of people do that, that's a pretty big debit out of the account of the Georgia Athletic Association. That's another one of these things that'll fly below the radar on some of this of, if Georgia's got your money, how badly do you want it back? And what does Georgia have to do for you to allow you to be willing to let them keep it?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions, more questions than answers. I think the big thing today, though, is hearing that they're going to have the 20 to 25%. Yeah, I'm still kind of wondering about tailgating, Brandon. This announcement, I don't believe, referenced that. When Georgia released their re-socialization plans earlier this summer, they indicated there wouldn't be tailgating. And then my second big question is the dog walk. They said that they're going to leave that up to the individual institutions, and that also hasn't been addressed. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I take that as a bad sign that neither one of those things were put in the release.
Yeah, if I had to assume, and I've tried to be optimistic throughout this entire process, but if I had to assume, I'm going to assume there is no dog walk this year, and I'm going to assume, at least when it comes to parking lots owned by the city of Athens, the parking lots owned by the university, which is where the majority of the tailgating takes place, I'm going to bet there's no tailgating in any of those spots whatsoever. If you live in an apartment complex near downtown Athens, or if you live in a home near downtown Athens, I guess what you do on your private land, as long as it doesn't exceed the allowed number of people for a public gathering, I guess that's your business. But for where most of the tailgating takes place, on university property, or in some case that city of Athens owned property, if I had to guess, Mike, I'm going to say there's probably no tailgating allowed in those places, and I say that as someone who's obviously optimistic that we have as much of a normal season as we can get, but I've kind of given up the ghost when it comes to the tailgating part of all this.
Yeah, and it's going to be tough, but you know what I've seen from them? I mean, listen, Georgia fans are resilient, and this is such a great community. What I've seen and what I've heard is Georgia fans saying, you know what, we're going to tailgate in our neighborhood. We're going to get to know our neighbors. We're going to grill, and we're going to invite our close friends over and families that we know, and that's how Georgia fans are going to get around it. I mean, I've heard that from so many people, and as you know, it's such a tight-knit community. It's going to stink for a lot of people to have to watch the game on TV or maybe not set up on those great spots on campus that make Athens such a wonderful, incredible place for a game day. I don't know why anybody would want to go anywhere else. But this year, maybe you're going to do it more from home with your neighbors, and who knows, maybe you make some new friends.
So one of the things I wanted to talk more about before you joined us, but wasn't able to because this announcement came down right as we were recording the show, was something that Nakobe Dean said yesterday about the defensive expectations surrounding Georgia. And this is not a new topic. It was very similar to what was said about the Georgia offensive line, for instance, a year ago. And I would say that group probably missed those expectations at least a little bit in terms of the full season's results. But when it comes to, and I don't think this is too strong of a word to use, the hype around the Georgia defense, do you think it's too much, and do you think it's a problem?
Well, I don't think it's too much, and I don't think it's a problem, but I don't think they're going to meet last year's numbers. And I think that's largely because of the kind of offense they're going to see. Number one, you had a torrential downpour against Kentucky when you shut out Kentucky. And, it was kind of rainy and sloppy against A&M, too. So that was two really bad weather games. It's not typical for Georgia. I mean, I guess they're possible. I haven't gone back to the history of the weather games. And then you had an offense that was bleeding the clock purposely, trying to run clock because, the receivers were so terrible and the passing game was so inconsistent. And so you didn't want to run a lot of plays. But what we've heard from Kirby Smart, and I don't know if you're buying in yet, Brandon. I'm not sure if you're a buyer or a seller on Kirby saying he wants tempo. I guess we got to see it to believe it. But he's saying he wants tempo. And we saw what happened to a pretty good LSU defense when they went tempo. It was a very good defense, in fact. But when you play tempo and when you play more snaps, that means more offense. Alabama's defense is probably the best example of that. They're still very good. They're still very talented. But statistically, they're not what they once were. And that's because they're running more plays. Now, if you're buying in and thinking Georgia's going to have more tempo on offense, that's going to put more stress and more plays for the defense.
So I guess I'm going to oversimplify my answer to that, which is if Georgia really does have the horses on defense, and it certainly seems to me they probably do, then all the more reason I would say to take chance with your offense because your defense ought to be able to withstand occasionally being put in a bad spot, either on a short field because when you run more plays, you're going to have occasionally more turnovers, or by maybe sometimes feeling a little fatigued. Georgia plays about 30 players, it would seem, a decent number of snaps. Therefore, also, you might be able to withstand that. So if Kirby really does trust his defense, then all the more reason I would say to take chance with your offense because you've got the defense that provides the luxury to be as aggressive as you need to be on the offensive side of the ball. Probably an oversimplification, but that's my opinion on that.
No, I think it's a good take, but the thing you got to take, the flip side of that is you don't want an offense that's going to give the other team a short field because you have such a good defense. You don't want a quarterback that's going to take chances or turn the ball over. Because if you punt it, how many teams are going to drive 80 yards on this defense versus if you throw an interception at your own 25, now you've given them a 30-yard short field. So provided that the quarterback can take care of the football and make good decisions, I think Kirby turns them loose. But if you can't take care of the football, he's going to tell you that a punt's not a bad play, and good luck driving 80 yards on that defense.
Let me talk about the SEC schedule for a moment. And what I said before you joined us is, if you look at the last 3 years, only one team in each of the last 3 years in the SEC has lost fewer than 2 games against SEC competition. Georgia in the 2017 season, when it played 10 SEC opponents, went 8-2 in those games. That's probably the best Georgia team of the last 40 years. Georgia under Kirby Smart has won against SEC opponents 4 weeks in a row on 2 different occasions, but it's never won against SEC teams 5 weeks in a row. It'll open the 2020 season, at least theoretically, assuming the coronavirus stays at bay, against 5 straight SEC teams. Mike, all of this leads to, and the gambling public seems to have come on board with this, it leads to a belief on my part that records in the SEC this year, I think, are going to look a little different than we're used to them seeing. I think the champion of this league may have an 8-2 regular season, and I could see a scenario where everybody in the league has more than one loss against SEC opponents. I hope that's not the case. I'm a Georgia fan. I'd love to see Georgia go 10-0, 9-1, something like that. But I think the past in this league, I think would lead you to believe that when you're only playing SEC competition, that record's not going to look too pretty by the end of the year.
Yeah, I think that's a great analysis. I'm going to give you a couple other hit notes in there. Only 3 SEC schools avoid playing back-to-back road games. Ready for this, conspiracy theorists? Alabama and Florida are 2 of them. They do not play back-to-back road games. And now, you can say, well, there's no fans there, but listen, the hassle, leaving a day early, getting on that airplane or whatever, that bus, away from home, there's a reason that the home field is considered an advantage. Part of it's the fans. We saw that against Notre Dame, but that rarely, in my mind, that Notre Dame game, that was something like I'd never seen before in terms of a fan affecting a game. You just don't see that often. Most of these offenses are pretty well equipped and able to handle it. But I still think playing at home has an advantage. I think the familiarity, I think the where you stay, I think travel complications with COVID-19 make it extremely difficult and obviously more dangerous, according to scientists. But the fact that only the Alabama, Florida, and Ole Miss are the only 3 teams that avoid back-to-back home games, and then you look at that Georgia schedule, and you know where I stand with this, Brandon. I think this is a screw job. I'm not happy at all. I think it's ridiculously front-loaded. Look, at the end of the year, you got what? Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, Missouri and some other bad team in the final month of the season. It's like that front end, that 4-game stretch, the most physical 4-game stretch in the SEC. Auburn, Tennessee, Alabama, Kentucky, with Tennessee, Kentucky, and Alabama having the 3 highest-rated offensive lines in the league. I think Georgia got a very difficult draw. They're away from home for 6 weeks in the middle of the season. 6 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I would say as someone who's followed Georgia football my entire life, when you talk about 5 games in 6 weeks, including the bye week, then Florida, I'm not quite sure how many times I've seen Georgia play a tougher schedule on paper than that looks to be. Now, the analytics folks will tell you that, Georgia measurably plays like the easiest schedule in the SEC, but that's only because Georgia can't play itself, much the same way Alabama can't play itself. So by comparison, those schedules will seem a little easier, but when you're doing that, that stretch after the Arkansas game through all the opponents you just mentioned, that's about as tough as I've seen Georgia play, Mike, and I'm thinking back my entire lifetime on this.
Yeah, and it's not. And there's other teams. You look at Alabama; they seem like they've got a cushion game here and there. Maybe listen, there's no such thing. Well, yeah, there is such a thing as an easy team. Vanderbilt might not even make it to the end of the year. They probably had another guy opt out during our conversation. I mean, what a pathetic program that is. And so, like I said earlier, I think we were talking earlier, BA, I said, for those of you that missed the Georgia Tech game, you get to watch Georgia beat up on another team in black and gold to end the year, and a game nobody else on television will be watching. I don't like the schedule at all. I think it's horrible. I think it's bad for the fans with this ticket policy. I feel bad for you. If you don't get a ticket for Tennessee or Auburn, those are your only 2 home games. I just don't think the other 2. Now, maybe as a curiosity with Mike Leach, and maybe for a quarter or so, it would have been better to draw Mississippi State earlier before they get in sync if you think they're going to be good. And there's also a chance he might be on his 4th quarterback by November because he tends to get those guys beat up a lot. It's an interesting schedule. I don't think it works for Georgia. I think I'd rather have seen Georgia's schedule heavier on the back end when we have time to see what this offense can do and it's well-groomed and clicking. Because early on, Brandon, I'm just not sure what this offense is going to look like. I've heard a lot of conflicting things about what's going on at Georgia with the offense and what they want to do and who can do what. And to me, that's just going to be fascinating. I do think we'll see 2 different starting quarterbacks for Georgia, maybe 3. I'd put the over/under at 2.5. Well,
let me talk quarterbacks before we're done here, because I was watching the monitor as you were talking when we run the video from Georgia practice, and so help me, Jamie Newman looks like the Incredible Hulk. I mean, it's hard for it's hard for a quarterback to be more flexed than those biceps are for him. He really obviously looks great. He's in great physical condition, but a physique alone is not enough to be a great starting quarterback. Kirby Smart gave us an update on JT Daniels' health going back to when he spoke a few days ago. I mean, where do you as we'll kind of preview what's about to happen with the Georgia practices, where is your head around this quarterback competition at the moment?
Well, I think, right now, Daniels, with the knee brace still on, and you want to give Jamie Newman, obviously, he's got to get coached up, right? This is a new offense. This is part of the reason why Jamie Newman came to Georgia, was to play in more of a pro-style offense. And that's why it's interesting to hear David Pollack say he thinks there's going to be more RPOs. Jamie Newman didn't come here for that. Jamie Newman came here to show he can throw the football and be an NFL quarterback. Now, that's not to say there won't be an RPO element to the game, but look, the bottom line is this. Jamie Newman's got to prove that he can make good decisions and make intermediate throws, throw touch passes. And Aaron Murray tells us this is an area where he struggled because of the physique, because of the strength. I don't know who buys into that or not, but Aaron Murray says because he's such a big, strong guy like a Tim Tebow, that he may not, be as well equipped to deliver. We know that's what JT Daniels does extremely well. But is JT Daniels healthy enough? And can he stay healthy enough? Because in this league, when they put you down, it's hard to get back up. So it's fascinating. And then Dwan Mathis. I mean, we've heard great things from the teammates of Georgia. Dwan Mathis, they all are, and don't forget Carson Beck. I mean, this kid just got to grow a little bit. If you saw that picture, I mean, you can see the difference between a 23-year-old man and an 18-year-old. But Carson Beck, a high football aptitude, talented guy. So I really do believe it's as wide open as Kirby says it is, and I think the proof's in the pudding. And what's happening right now with shorts and helmets is great, but what's going to really matter is when they get to that scrimmage a week from Saturday.
Yeah, that's certainly true, and we'll look forward to reading a bunch from you at DawgNation.com as you continue to cover that. Mike, thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort, and we'll enjoy the chance to speak to you again soon.
Some great takes, BA. Thanks, man.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, some interesting stuff there with Mike Griffith. We'll roll on here. We'll do our SEC Through. Let me also remind you about our Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. Don't forget, brand new time for Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. That's our recruiting show with Jeff Sintel. It comes up every Wednesday night. New time now, 8 p.m. moving forward. I guess the powers that be have decided that's a more convenient time for everybody to access the program. So check that out, 8 p.m. Wednesday night, starting tonight, and every Wednesday night moving forward for Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. And, of course, listen, speaking of our friends at Kroger, as you're getting back to school, a lot of school supplies, maybe you realize you didn't quite have everything that you're supposed to have on that. Well, you can shop smarter at Kroger, and they'll make sure that you got everything you need. Take care of all that stuff. Notebooks, crayons, everything else. Listen, I know we've been back and forth a million times to pick up those extra school supplies we needed. There's a lot more like art stuff this year, it would seem, because kids, I guess, aren't going to the art room, things like that. Your kids may not be going to the classroom and all. They may be remote online learning for right now. That means the supply list just a little weird for everybody this year. So if you've still got some outstanding items that you need to get, make sure you stop by your local Kroger and take advantage of that. And don't forget, by the way, Wednesday is also a big day for teachers to save big on Kroger there as well. Stop by your local Kroger and find out a whole lot more about that. All right, here's what I'm going to try to do. I'm going to try to squeeze in a bunch of stuff here on the SEC Through so that I can get to the Nakobe Dean stuff that I wanted to talk about a little earlier in the show before the other news broke. Brett McMurphy on Twitter, that's the veteran college football reporter, upon hearing that Georgia's going to play Arkansas Week 1, the rest of the SEC slate, he has talked to some gambling folks. We have some point spreads for those games, at least according to Brett McMurphy. I meant to mention this yesterday. I'll give it to you today. A&M's a 37-point favorite against Vanderbilt. LSU a 26-point favorite against Mississippi State. Georgia minus 24 at Arkansas. Bama minus 19.5 at Missouri. Auburn minus 11 against Kentucky, Florida minus 8 at Ole Miss, and then South Carolina and Tennessee is a pick 'em for right now. I will very quickly tell you this. I love South Carolina against Tennessee there in that spot. I could definitely be talked into taking Alabama minus 19.5 on the road again at Missouri. That feels like a fairly interesting scenario. And let's talk about Kentucky as 11-point underdog Week 1 against Auburn. Now, I'm relatively high on Auburn, but this is the challenge of an SEC-only schedule. As I said before, there are potential landmines all the way around. Every team in this league, with the exception of 3, has won at least 3 games in each of the last 3 years. There's parity here. Watch out for Kentucky there against Auburn Week 1. By the way, speaking of Kentucky, Mark Stoops spoke yesterday about the status of his quarterback, Joey Gatewood. The long and short of this is they are still waiting. I believe that if Gatewood is given eligibility, I think there's a really good chance that he's the starter there. I think Gatewood, in what was at one point in time a very crowded quarterback situation at Auburn, probably distinguished himself maybe more than was initially realized, in a battle that included Bo Nix and Court Sandberg and Malik Willis. Gatewood was the guy that Malzahn tabbed as the number 2 well before that was over with. For the most part, everyone thought Bo Nix was going to win. But Gatewood had earned some respect during that Auburn quarterback competition. If he's eligible Kentucky, I believe he'll be the starter there. That could be a one worth watching. Should have said this yesterday. I didn't, but Alabama's been on quite a run with recruiting lately. They flipped a 4-star quarterback from Texas, Jalen Milroe. This is, top 4 dual threat quarterback in the country or whatever. This is 4-star type guy. So Alabama goes out and flips a quarterback from Texas. They have been on a nice little run in recruiting lately. You got to give Saban and them some credit for that. Speaking of Alabama and speaking of quarterbacks, their preseason camp has started. Devontae Smith, talked to Matt Zenitz from AL.com, had some very nice things to say about Alabama freshman quarterback Bryce Young, who he says he thinks is ready right now. If we were called upon to be played, he thinks that Young would be ready. I have been a big believer for a while that for the transition either to Mac Jones as a full season starter or Bryce Young stepping in as a freshman starter, I've been of the belief that the presence of Smith, the presence of Jalen Waddle, 2 of those would have been very good Alabama receivers the last couple of years, makes that process easier. Apparently thus far, Devontae Smith likes what he sees from Bryce Young. We'll continue to follow this story for obvious reasons. So Georgia now joins Alabama, which announced 20% capacity yesterday. Tennessee right there in that same ballpark. Sounds like A&M is going to try to be a little higher. The SEC policy here is going to call for everyone to be masked when they're, not sitting next to their family members there in the stadium. There's a lot of social distancing that's going to be in place for SEC games this year. So Georgia would seem kind of falling in with the rest of the SEC right now in terms of the percentage capacity it's going to try to go with, and we'll see if they're able to actually get that done, and we'll make that your SEC through. Let me also mention this before I get to what I thought was a pretty interesting piece of Nakobe Dean audio from yesterday. David Purdom, who covers the gambling industry for ESPN, has got some additional point spreads. We gave you Georgia as a 24-point favorite at Arkansas to open the season. How about some of the other key games for the Dogs this upcoming year? David Purdom for ESPN says that Georgia is a 7.5-point favorite at home against Auburn on October the 3rd, a 5.5-point underdog at Alabama on October the 17th, and a 3.5-point favorite against Florida on November 7th, which is right about where that number has been, not just for most of this offseason, but really the last couple of years. That's about what Georgia's been favored throughout the year via these look-ahead lines. So Dogs 7.5 against Auburn. That's pretty similar to the original look-ahead line on that. Georgia at Alabama 5.5. That's been everywhere from like a 4.5 to a 6.5, 7.5 over the course of the last couple of months. And Georgia 3.5 against Florida. If you're interested, he also gives you Florida as a 2.5-point favorite at home against LSU. Alabama is a 2-point favorite on the road at LSU. So David Purdom giving us a couple numbers there, including Georgia, a favorite against Auburn, favorite against Florida, and a fairly sizable road underdog against Alabama of 5.5 points. I think 7.5 against Auburn, by the way, week 2 is kind of a lot. I do. This is just going to be one of those seasons where, you know, the easy blowout wins, I'm just not quite so, or the comfortable 2-touchdown wins, I'm just not quite so sure how many any of the top SEC teams are going to be enjoying. This may be one of those years where you have to learn how to grind it out if you're Georgia or if you're anybody else. And of course, one of the things that potentially makes that easier for UGA this upcoming season, it's what's thought to be a great defense. And I talked to Mike Griffith about this a moment ago, of is the hype a problem? Are the expectations potentially a problem? Is this something you need to push back against? Well, Mike gave his answer. Georgia linebacker Nakobe Dean, when asked a version of this question by a reporter yesterday, also kind of pushed back on the notion that this defense has accomplished anything as of yet. Here's Georgia's sophomore linebacker.
People kind of assume defense will be just as good again. Have there been any talk among the guys on defense or the coaches to kind of guard against complacency?
Of course, we haven't did nothing. The 2020 defense haven't did anything. We haven't even stepped on the field yet and passed. So that's all that we really need to say. We haven't did nothing on the field yet.
So much of what Dean's having to say there, what other defensive players will be asked about over the course of the next couple of months, a few weeks for sure, really reminds me a lot about the conversation about the Georgia offensive line going into last season. There was a moment in the summer where a lot of boosters were invited to watch a scrimmage, and the reports from people who were there were in an early portion of the scrimmage when the Georgia offensive line wasn't doing well. Kirby Smart, who's got that big microphone that he speaks into, was like, the greatest offensive line in the history of ball, can't get 1 yard, or whatever it was that was said there. It was an example right away. This Georgia offensive line was going to be pushed by those expectations and reminded by Kirby Smart, very much like what Nakobe Dean just said there of, you guys haven't done anything yet. And in fact, let me give you an example of that from right after that same scrimmage that I just referenced. Kirby Smart acknowledging publicly to reporters that maybe the offensive line hadn't quite gone out and gotten it done there that day. This is what Smart said back in August.
You know, I know that if you're not scoring points on offense, there's probably not going to be a lot of ball lining up for awards. And, you know, we didn't score a lot of points today. So at the end of the day, it's one of those things, how well you perform, what is your identity, what are you trying to create? Because there's some good players on that offensive line, but good players got to play good.
So that was obviously the precursor to what ended up being a season for the Georgia offensive line in 2019, where I think you would say while the group was good, it produced 2 first-round picks and another draft pick in Solomon Kinley in terms of meeting the expectations of being the greatest offensive line in Georgia history or even the greatest offensive line in college football for last year. I think for the most part, you would say that Georgia fell short of that goal a season ago for its offensive line. And I don't believe that the hype and the expectations weighed the Georgia group down, nor do I believe, because the Georgia offensive line dealt with that a year ago, that the defense is likely to succumb to the same thing here this upcoming year. That's not my point in saying this. My point in saying this is that football has a way of being difficult to predict. That what seems obvious, well, Georgia will just use its big offensive line and lean on every team that it plays. That's what most of us thought going into last season. In retrospect, that wasn't quite as easy to do as it appeared that it might be at the beginning of the season. Sometimes the defensive predictions could potentially work the same way there as well. I think what will be helpful moving forward, though, is to focus less on the expectations for being the best, the likelihood that Georgia does live up to the hype, and to really address what this group still needs to do, that even in the midst of all the success it enjoyed a season ago, what it didn't quite accomplish being more impactful with negative plays. I'm going to be talking about this a lot over the course of the next few weeks. How do you get more sacks? How do you get more tackles for loss? If you can be the kind of defense that wreaks, to use the word we used a bunch last season, more havoc, then all of a sudden those expectations, living up to that actually becomes a little easier to do. So if you don't mind, let me do a non-football note to close this out. I was watching ESPN this morning, and they ran a commercial for the NBA Draft Lottery, which is going to be Thursday. And as I looked up at the screen, I saw that big Georgia G right down the ESPN screen. Obviously, Ant-Man Anthony Edwards is right at the center of the NBA draft discussion this year, and the lottery will be another example of that. I guess the reason why I bring this up is because I think we're about to find out how valuable the Ant-Man era was for Georgia. How much extra attention does it bring the way of the Dogs? How much does it do to build the brand of UGA? Let's watch to see how much a guy like Edwards gets talked about on ESPN over the course of the next couple of weeks, couple months, and when he does, how much Georgia basketball is also talked about because of that. Could be an interesting thing worth paying attention to. By the way, Gator Hater updater on the way out the door here. 1,390 days. We'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. Appreciate all of you being with us as a part of this one today. Breaking news during the show involving the Georgia schedule stuff. Some of you are season ticket holders. I'll be interested to hear your opinions on this. Others of you would like to get your hands on some tickets for some games this year, either for a game in Athens or maybe had dreamed of traveling somewhere to watch the Dogs play this year. How easy or difficult is that going to be? I think we're still going to be waiting to find out some of that kind of stuff. But we can talk about all of that with you, including some thoughts on the challenges of a 10-game schedule, the expectations for the Georgia defense, and then everything in between on a busy day for us here today. I did start on YouTube yesterday, but the YouTube folks say that I don't start there enough. So let me go to YouTube first. And as I do, I'll remind you that if you're worried about your air conditioning not making its way through the rest of the hot weather season to come, and there is a lot more hot weather still on the way here, if you're worried about that, then get your system tuned back up to factory fresh specs with my friends at R.S. Andrews. It costs just $99, and it's easy to get in touch with Dari and the whole team over there. Just find them online at rsandrews.com. They'll take really good care of you. Scott Boland says, I like the sweater. Any links for retail? So this is kind of some of the really cool stuff that you can find at the UGA bookstore. A great spot for UGA apparel. Thanks for saying this. They always have a great line. This is, I believe, Peter Millar, and they have the Peter Millar line there at the UGA bookstore. We've been at the UGA bookstore for a number of years after games. I think the plan is to still be there for this upcoming season, although I guess you have to wait and see on some of that kind of stuff. But yeah, if you check out the UGA bookstore, they got a lot of stuff like what I'm wearing right now. And Kevin says, not much talk about tight ends. I think we'll be better there this year. I would say that's going to be an interesting position to watch. I think that Trey McKitty's got a chance to be really good for you. I think a guy like John Fitzpatrick has a real opportunity, too, as someone who's been on the roster. Everyone knows about Darnell Washington, what he brings to the table potentially, assuming that he's healthy. I guess health is also potentially also a concern for Rylan Goody, maybe a bit, too, based on some cryptic tweets from him. So, yeah, there's no shortage of potential guys there in that spot. I would say that McKitty, because he's played so much and he's been thrown to in an offense before the way that he was at Florida State, would be a guy that I'm certainly watching closely. And then Fitzpatrick are there as well. Army Dog Charlie says, are y'all still going to do a game after the show on campus? That is our hope. The UJ bookstore technically, kind of a sovereign land inside the Georgia campus. But yeah, we're hoping to be there. God willing, and the creek don't rise, as Hank Williams would have said. Frank Patterson also likes the idea of Trey McKitty having a big year for the Georgia offense. Should be interesting. Did we talk about Nathan Morris asking if we talked about the betting odds for the big games? Yeah, we did talk about some of those. For Nathan, let me see if I can recap this. 7.5, Georgia's favorite at home against Auburn. 3.5, Georgia's favorite in Jacksonville against Florida. And according to David Purdom for ESPN, 5.5, Georgia is an underdog at Alabama. Let's see what else. Scott Harris says, I'm doing my summer shows from the Southern Hemisphere. So I said this yesterday. I just think that, and part of me realizing this was, Kirby Smart, when he did his press conference the other day, he had the pullover on as well. I just have sort of decided that I probably look better in pullovers. So I don't wear the pullover all day long, but in the studio, and it's a little warm, but, normal TV people are wearing like sport coats and things like that. I've just about decided that the golf shirt on the video screen might not be the best look for me, but sometimes it is. And occasionally I still will wear those, but when possible, I may do the pullovers. Frank Patterson says, if you guys aren't allowed to go to the away games, could you do a cover 4+1? We all watch and chat together. Yeah, I think that, listen, we've got all kinds of, ideas out there, and we're going to be ready to roll with the punches, whatever the upcoming season brings to us. But yeah, Frank, thank you for saying that. Nathan Moore says that Bo Nix will be much better this year. If I had to predict, I would say that's probably true. Scott Harris says, any news on the kicking game? I did notice that in one of the videos that Georgia put out this week, they did put a guy kicking in the video. I couldn't tell who it was, but they did put a guy kicking in one of their videos this week. So at least in a video method, they have acknowledged there's a kicking competition ongoing. But I continue to believe that, is he the favorite? I don't really know how you'd even determine this, but I would believe that Jake Camarda, the current starting punter, is also a contender for those place kicking duties as well. If I had to predict, that's one of the predictions I might be willing to make on that. It's an important story for sure. I would also say that, in recent years when you'd go to Georgia practice, the way the practice fields were configured, there was a small field, not 100 yards long, that was typically the kicker's field. And, when you were, as a media member, walking over to see a couple minutes of practice, you would walk by the kicker's field, and there'd be kickers kicking. It used to be Rodrigo Blankenship, and that's all they were really doing. The field was just used for kickers. That field is not there anymore. That's the spot where the new football facility is being built. It's almost like you're erecting a skyscraper in New York City, because there's so much landlocked area around that. You get the track on the one spot, which they're never moving for whatever reason, the indoor facility, and then like right in between that and with the 100-yard practice fields just above them, you've got that one spot that's now going to be built as the football facility. So in addition to breaking in a new kicker, in terms of the real estate that gets used for the kicking practice, at least the real estate that I've seen them use, that's not there anymore. So I'd be curious to kind of know how the process of determining who the kicker is going to be. You got a new special teams coach in Scott Cochran. What is that process like? I'd be curious to learn more about that. Marshall Fleming says Auburn's in a rebuild this year. They lose 3+ games. So as we said to start the show, let's be careful about thinking that 7-3 is necessarily an awful year against only SEC competition. Let's be careful about that. But in terms of this being a true full rebuild for Auburn, I'm not quite so sure I'm there. I think they're still plenty good at receiver. I think that they have, a better quarterback returning starter there. And, defensively, they obviously lose some huge names, Davidson, Brown. But I still expect there to be some playmakers in that defense. Auburn is a team that I'm a little scared of still. Scared's the wrong word. Auburn's a game in which that I definitely have circled as one that's not a tune-up for Alabama, in other words. That's a game where you got to be at your best to go out there and try to win that. Robert Barnes says he thinks they put the pads on tomorrow. I believe that Kirby said there's going to be their 5th practice, which probably won't come until next week, I don't think. So I think it's practice number 5. They get to wear those pads for the first time. Randy Hall says he saw where Gunnar Stockton's trending towards South Carolina. I absolutely respect South Carolina in that recruitment. I do. There's a lot of ties to Bobo. There's a tie between South Carolina staffer Connor Shaw and Stockton, going back to his high school coach Jabo Shaw at Rabun County. Doesn't mean it's impossible for Georgia to win that recruitment, but there's some real ties there. Brian Whitehead says, I'd love to see Ole Miss beat Florida game 1. Boy, you and me both. Florida starting the season 0-1 sounds really good. John Rice Plumlee going to give third and Grantham fits. You may be right about that, Brian. That's fun to think about. Fun to think about. What else is going on Facebook here today? Let's see what else. Matt, I said a moment ago, I'd be curious to see how the kicking competition plays out. Matt says they probably have them kick the ball and pick the one who kicks better. That's how I would do it. That seems like a pretty good idea. B. Huds checking in on the quarterback competition. Kyle Folds brings up a good point that when you're breaking in a new kicker, the possibility that you're kicking in a mostly empty stadium and, in the end zone area may be completely empty. That is, I would say, an easier transition for a college kicker to make. I've said a million times that there's a certain aspect of being a place kicker in the SEC that you cannot prepare for until you're in a game and that spider camera's hanging over your head and those, thousands of fans are cheering for you to miss it. You don't get that experience in high school, even kicking in big-time high school football. You just don't get that experience. Most high school kickers kick all their kicks into a open night sky. There is no, they're just, you're not kicking towards people, and it's just a different experience at the college level. And the absence of fans this year, at least the majority of fans, I think is an easier thing to transition there. Joe Branham says he's pulling for DeJuan Mathis. Yeah, you continue to hope to see good things from Mathis. Joy Robinson says, have they told us more about the protocols for entering the stadium other than wearing a mask? And there's obviously going to be a big push for social distancing when it's possible. One of the things about Sanford Stadium, which is, I always get the north and the south side confused, but the side that we kind of think of as the alumni side, the shaded side for a day game, where the really, really moneyed donors have typically sat over the years, the stadium corridor just inside that, between, like, say, the 25-yard lines, is very narrow. You almost wonder, will they even be using that this year, just given how narrow that it is? So a lot of these old SEC stadiums, finding a way to maintain that social distance, just given the way the stadiums themselves are constructed, is not going to be easy to do. They've expanded most of the concourses around Sanford Stadium to widen a lot of them, but that one's one that you just really can't do much to widen, and it's not going to be easy to maintain social distancing in there if that part of the stadium is going to be used. Being reminded about our Top Band project. Randy, every time I see your name, I think about that, and I haven't forgotten about it. I don't quite know yet how we're going to do that, but I haven't forgotten about it, and I appreciate you being patient with me on that. I really do. This is kind of cool. Demetris Frico Sonia White says that Ware County High School kicks towards the home side bleachers. The stadium is a wraparound. So I've been to Ware County before. I've seen that ballpark. It's a great-looking stadium. Really nice-looking stadium. Fred Gibson, by the way, former Georgia wide receiver, went to Ware County. It's the only Gators that I like, the Ware County Gators. That's the only Gators that I'll tolerate. It's right there near Okefenokee Swamps. They have the Gators nickname, and it's a really cool-looking stadium. I should have remembered that was the wraparound deal there, but thank you for sharing that. Bobby Leather says over-under on 10 interceptions this year. I guess I'd probably say over on that. As I said before, if you're running more plays, throwing the ball more, then a couple more interceptions is just part of that. I don't think that you have to be really scared of interceptions. As I said to Mike Griffith, if I truly thought I had a great defense, then all the more reason to be aggressive with my offense so that my great defense can step up and save me when it needs to. And to me, that's how a great defense proves that it's great. Get off the field in a short field, go out and, get dynamic negative plays. A great defense is going to have to do more than just hold a meager offense to a field goal when they've been asked to work a long field. That's not what great defense sometimes is. You watch these NFL films things, the coach on the sideline after a turnover, quick change. That's what they're shouting. Kirby Smart's already said that 2020 may be a year of quick change in college football for a lot of reasons, but what do you do in a quick change scenario? How quickly do you get that chin strap buckled, get out there and stop a opposing offense, even on a short field because an interception was thrown? I think the very best offenses, the very best quarterbacks are the ones that are willing to throw the ball into a tough spot, into a tight window, as they say. And if you're willing to do that, you may hit a couple of home runs, but you're going to occasionally strike out, and you got to help you've got to ask your defense to bail you out once that happens. You can't do that too much, but you can certainly do it some. Philip Jordan Wells says his cousin played for Ware County. That's kind of cool. Let me go back over to YouTube for a moment. We'll get ready to wrap up after that. Tristan West, we talked about John Rice Plumlee earlier, and Tristan also mentioned Jerry and Ely, the running back. Remember, this was a huge recruiting win when Ely, who I believe was a former five-star, when he went to Ole Miss. That was a major, major recruiting win. That's a team that can really do it on the ground for sure. And ask LSU about that. LSU, of course, won the game, but man, that Ole Miss ground attack against LSU a year ago was really racking up yards. Can you imagine if week one, if Ely and Rice Plumlee, and maybe they're bringing in Matt Corral for the occasional pass, if they're just chewing up yards against that Florida defense, oh my gosh, I'll just love that. I would love that. James Wade says, no mention with the latest committed recruit. We talked about him yesterday. We had a nice time doing that. Javon Bullard, we're thrilled for him. I love when Georgia keeps those dogs at home. So big day for Bullard yesterday, and we talked about that. How about this from Frank Patterson? This is a good prediction. He says, I got South Carolina finishing second in the East. I think South Carolina is pretty good too. You may think you may think they are better than I do, but that's a fun prediction, Frank. I love people who go out on a limb about stuff like that. Love a good take. Scott Pete says he's worried about the Georgia kicking game more than the other issues. It's certainly something to be paying attention to. I agree with Tristan West that the Georgia depth could come into play and be handy this year. I think that's probably true. What else is going on? Jay Scheib says it's better odds that Georgia now goes for it on fourth down if the offense is moving the ball when you're breaking in a new kicker. And I think at least I hope that's true. I mean, listen, smart coaches, I think, do go for it on fourth down. One of the things I'd love to see Kirby Smart do a little bit more of. Kirby Smart's a brilliant coach, I would say, in a lot of ways, and certainly he knows, magnitudes more about football than I do. But one of the things I do wish is that just across the board, he was just a little bit more aggressive. And I think going for it on fourth down is a great way to be aggressive. I do. I think that's what good teams should do. They ought to push the envelope against their opponent. Frank Patterson also talked about the weird situation between Mack Wilson and Nick Chubb at Cleveland Browns practice. Army Dog not happy about that either. Dream XP, and we'll make this our last one on YouTube, says, will there be a college football playoff or bowl games? So the playoff says they're going to still try to do this. The bowl games, I think we'll have to still kind of wait and see about how many of them are able to have a bowl season this year with so few teams and just so few, the potential for fans, which is kind of a part of that process. But the college football playoff for now says they want to move forward. So we'll see. We will see. Anything else on Facebook for right now? Jeremy Smith says leaders must emerge on both sides of the ball. Red zone plays must result in touchdowns on offense. I believe the defense will take care of business. We left way too many points in the field last year. Yeah, I think that's true. I think you do need that new leadership in place. And, one of the things that'll be interesting to watch is right now, I think it's pretty obvious that Kirby views the leaders of the Georgia offense, the guys along the offensive line. Jamari Salyer hasn't been a full season starter yet. And there's no doubt that Salyer's the spokesman for the Georgia offense at the moment. Trey Hill, I would say, was kind of tapped in that role too. Those are the two offensive guys that spoke a couple of days ago to kind of kick off Georgia practice. How quickly does it become that someone else other than one of these offensive linemen kind of becomes the mouthpiece, spokesman, the focal point of the Georgia offense? Now, sometimes this is related to just who's more comfortable speaking in front of a microphone. But in other cases, about truly asserting yourself as a real leader, the way that DeAndre Swift would have last year, the way that, other guys have over the course of seasons for Georgia. At what point in time does the mantle of leadership transition from just the lineman to either one of the quarterbacks or one of the running backs or, or someone from that wide receiving core. That's going to be a fun transition to hopefully see occur for Georgia this upcoming season. All right. So we covered a lot of ground in today's show, the breaking news with the attendance, everything else. Appreciate you being a part of it. By the way, to stay up to date on everything happening in your world, beyond just what's happening with Georgia football, make sure you check out ajc.com for your Atlanta news now. And AJC's got a very special event going on today. It's the AJC Community Conversation. It's facts about COVID-19, healthcare experts. You can watch it live with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's investigations editor, Ken Foskett, kind of covering some of the big issues surrounding all of this. It's 5 to 6 p.m. today. It's the AJC Facebook page and YouTube page. The hashtag for more information on this is hashtag AJC Convo. That's hashtag AJC Convo. That'll get you in touch with that. You can also find your Atlanta news now on AJC.com there as well. As we said before, kind of getting ready for the NBA draft. Good stories coming up at that on AJC.com. So it's just some kind of nice stuff all the way around. Democratic National Convention continues. Politics coverage there at AJC.com there as well. Also an update for those of you that love the AJC Peachtree Road Race. This year going to be done virtually, but there's still a chance you get a t-shirt. You can find out more about that online with your Atlanta news now at AJC.com. Big thanks to R.S. Andrews, making the R.S. Andrews cool down possible. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. You can trust R.S. Andrews to do all that for you. If your water heater, for instance, goes out, in many cases, R.S. Andrews can replace it for you the same day. But you've got to find them online at rsandrews.com. Tell Dari and the whole team over there we said hello, and we'll say hello to you again tomorrow, 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. We'll talk to you then, everybody. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.